And we got to Invisible War. And you stepped up again, took a project leadership position.
This was a very difficult project for me. I was basically, personally, I was going through a separation that would eventually end in a divorce. And on top of that, I feel like we fucked up the technology management of it. We screwed up we had bad team chemistry. We wrote the wrong renderer. We wrote the wrong kind of AI. And then we shipped too early. And you know, the story was even bad. Like, it wasn't a bad story. It was more like we moved into the future, which really, we didn't realize at the time, but undermined a lot of what made Deus Ex great. A lot of what made Deus Ex great was the familiarity, the groundedness. You're going through an alley, you know, jumping up on a dumpster to get to a fire escape to break into somebody's apartment. And we've all seen alleys and chain link fences and dumpsters. So it's very powerful, it's very grounded. And we moved it further into the future, and it started to feel like the Jetsons or, you know, some sort of space type thing or something. I don't know. So I think in the end we made, you know, an 85% rated RPG that was not a worthy sequel to the original game as in terms of how interesting the original game was. And that's unfortunate. It was also my first console game, though, and like... you know, it is a different beast to work on a console game. You know, you have to think about the interface and the memory differently and everything else. So.
But there were, I don't want to turn this into a mutual flagellation society here or anything, but there were certain things that we saw as problems in Deus Ex that we very explicitly wanted to address. So can you
That's a great point.
Can you talk about what you thought some of those problems were, and because they really informed. I mean, I'll start talking if you don't, so you're really better.
No, it's a really good point. Like we listened. The lesson I've learned on Black Site is like really talk to the players that you're aiming at. Like you will have some hardcore friend who will tell you the most extreme version of what you're supposed to do, and that would be cool. And you'll lose 90% of the audience if you do that. And you just always have to remember, it's not selling out to cater to an audience, right? Like, what are you doing? If you want to make an indie game, sit in your closet and make an indie game and release it for 4 guys on the internet. That's great. That's totally noble. Some of my friends have done that. I highly recommend that if that's what drives you. There's a recent game called The Marriage. Super, super indie, low budget. The guy did it in a weekend. It was brilliant. If, on the other hand, you're taking $20 million of somebody's money and you are on the surface aiming at an Xbox Live crowd, then going to some crazy extreme is probably not a good idea, right? Unless it's an extreme that will take your audience to some new interesting place, and they can and then if you are going to do that, you're going to spend 80% of the project communicating with the user about this new thing that's interesting, because it's going to take that. Anyway, so I think what we did with Deus Ex was we listened to our super hardcore friends who told us, here's how I would fix Deus Ex. I mean, we had some friends, some good friends, who told us that Deus Ex was a giant disaster, and here's what they would change. And I love those guys, and we really felt sensitive about that. We really felt like, God, we're not meeting the demands, or we're not meeting the standards of our very intelligent designer friends. So ashamed. Let's fix all that in the sequel. And we weren't listening to the players of the original game who liked what we had done. And so in trying to fix some of those things, redundant things, like we had skills and augmentations that were overlapping and redundant. So we eliminated those. We boiled them all down into one system, which was easier on the console interface. It was easier to learn. But it didn't allow for certain combinations that, even if they weren't mechanically interesting, they built a fantasy in the player's head. Like, you know, hey, I could let you take the swimming skill and the aqualung augmentation, or I could give you a biomod for the sequel that is called Swimmer or whatever, and it has both built into it. And they're mechanically the same. This one gives you plus 50% breath capacity, and it lets you swim 30% faster at the max level. This biomod could do both of those things. It's fine. But it wasn't the same to the user. The user wanted the fantasy of thinking, I am the aquatic guy, therefore I'm going to take up these slots and these slots to be the aquatic guy in combination. Even though mechanically, economically, it's the same, in the fantasy, it's different. And so basically hindsight is 20/20. You know.
Yeah.